The movie begins by showing Harriet Chetwood, a business consultant from the UK, emailing Alfred Jones, a salmon expert in British fisheries, about a salmon fishing project in Yemen. In his email reply, Alfred stated that the project was impossible. On the other hand, Patricia Maxwell, who worked for the British Prime Minister's public relations, was tasked with maintaining good cooperation with countries in the Middle East after the breaking out conflict in Afghanistan. Patricia chose the salmon fishing project to maintain good relations between the two countries. She immediately contacted Bernard Sugden, Alfred's superior, to ensure that the salmon fishing project in Yemen remained ongoing. Alfred was talking to one of his colleagues in the office to finish his work. After his colleague gave him a file and left, Bernard's assistant came and asked Alfred to see Bernard, who got a mandate from the government. Bernard asked Alfred to meet Harriet immediately and discuss the salmon fishing project in Yemen. Alfred rejected the idea because he thought the project was just a joke where he had to create a fishing spot in the desert. However, Bernard continued to insist that Alfred had to see Harriet first before deciding to reject the project. Being urged, Alfred finally met Harriet at her office. Without too many pleasantries, Alfred explained to Harriet that the project she offered was impossible to implement, because Yemen was a desert area that lacked water. Harriet argued this because the Yemeni area had changed, and even the country managed to build a dam to overcome the drought. Alfred felt he had lost the argument, so he remained silent and listened to Harriet's explanation. Returning to his office, Alfred went to Bernard and told him to stop the project immediately. Bernard had his plan and gave Alfred a document to sign. He tried to persuade Alfred by paying him to double his current salary if Alfred wanted to carry out the salmon fishing project, and if he refused the project, he had to resign from office. At first, Alfred chose to leave, but he tried to be realistic and think about his wife and his future. He was finally willing to sign the document given by Peter Maxwell. Meanwhile, at Harriet's house, her boyfriend, Robert, a soldier, tells her that he was assigned to go to Afghanistan. The following day, Alfred returned to Harriet's office to present his ideas for implementing a salmon fishing project in Yemen. However, Alfred looked more relaxed about doing the project. He didn't even prepare anything for the presentation. Although Alfred's presentation seemed haphazard, Harriet praised his intelligence in realizing salmon fishing in Yemen. Harriet then asked about the estimated costs needed to realize Alfred's idea. Alfred replied that the cost was enormous, about £50 million. Without a second thought, Harriet agreed to the funds Alfred had requested, and he was surprised to hear. Harriet then walked Alfred out of the building and assured him the project would succeed. Alfred asked her to prepare the best engineers who would handle the process of making salmon fishing. Harriet accepted Alfred's request and asked him to be ready because the owner of the capital that would provide the project construction funds come directly from Yemen to London in the next few days. At lunchtime, Alfred seemed to be waiting for Bernard and his colleague to talk about the salmon fishing project. Soon, Bernard came along with Patricia. After introducing himself, Alfred began addressing the needs of about 10,000 salmon he would use for salmon fishing development in Yemen. With the magnitude of the value of the project Alfred would be running, Patricia revealed that the project would be a top priority. Not only that, but she also asked Bernard to provide whatever was needed in the project to ensure that it would run smoothly so that the Prime Minister could move forward in the next election. A few days later, Alfred met with Sheikh Mohammed bin Saudi, an investor in a salmon fishing project in Yemen. He was visiting Britain. Harriet was also there to accompany the sheikh. The three of them were currently on the river banks for fishing. Sheikh praised Alfred's intelligence, which found the best bait for fishing. Shortly after, Alfred and Sheikh started fishing while chatting about their lives. Suddenly, Sheikh's bait was struck by a relatively large fish. He was pleased because he managed to get fish. At night, Sheikh was chatting with Harriet and Alfred. Harriet said she was sad because her boyfriend was serving on the battlefields and had not given any news to her until now. On the other hand, Alfred only explained that his relationship with his wife has recently been poor. Since the night was late, Sheikh asked Harriet and Alfred to rest. However, before Alfred left, Sheikh spoke to him. He found out that Alfred was forced to help with the project. So, he reminded him that if Alfred did not open his heart to accept his work, then nothing good would happen to him. The following day, Bernard, who was in the office, appeared to be doing a video call with Tori, his colleague, to offer cooperation in sending 10,000 salmon to Yemen. Unfortunately, his colleague refused and assumed that it was impossible. On the other hand, Alfred was surprised by Harriet's arrival at his office. She informed him that the dam engineers from China had come to her office, so Alfred had to meet them and explain the project. In Harriet's office, Alfred and Harriet seemed nervous when explaining the salmon fishing project in Yemen because they had not prepared for the sudden meeting. At lunch, Alfred was having lunch at a restaurant. He appeared to give the waiter a code so that the waiter does not pour wine into his glass. While eating, suddenly, Harriet got the news that her boyfriend was missing on the battlefield. The news struck her, so Alfred, who saw Harriet crying on the restaurant balcony, tried to calm her down. A few days after the incident, Harriet locked herself in the house. Alfred visited Harriet because he was worried about her. Alfred came to bring food for her. He knew Harriet wouldn't eat after the sad news about her boyfriend. Alfred seemed to force Harriet to eat the food he brought. The two of them then chatted, and Alfred said that he would go to Yemen tomorrow. He invited Harriet to join him because he thought no one could replace Harriet's outstanding performance in handling salmon fishing projects in Yemen. Harriet smiled back after listening to Alfred's words. The following day, Alfred and Harriet arrived in Yemen. They were with Sheikh, who was preparing to check the location of the salmon fishing. Shortly after, one of Sheikh's colleagues came to him. They seemed to be arguing about something that made Sheikh feel bad about Alfred and Harriet because they had to see him fight with someone else. Sheikh then took Alfred and Harriet to the location of the fishing project. They started discussing things about the project there. In the business, Alfred and Harriet seemed to capture some of their moments of togetherness with Sheikh and others. Meanwhile, Bernard was still contacting Tori and trying to persuade his colleague to send 10,000 salmon to Yemen. The media finally learned of a significant project that required sending 10,000 salmon. Some appeared to disapprove of the project. Many used Save Our Salmon headlines from urging the government to stop salmon fishing. Patricia, representing the British administration, then visited Sheikh in Yemen. Sheikh hosted Patricia, Alfred, and Harriet, still in Yemen, for lunch. Afterward, Patricia invited Sheikh, Alfred, and Harriet to visit the salmon penitentiary. At that place, Patricia said if Sheikh could not get the salmon that came from the river, but the salmon that came from captivity. Sheikh disagreed with this because the salmon from captivity differed from the salmon from the river. So, the cooperation between Sheikh and the British government ended. Alfred, disappointed with Patricia's attitude, quit the project. After that, Alfred and Sheikh decided to go fishing in a river to calm their minds. Without Sheikh knowing it, a man was trying to harm himself. When Alfred realized that, he used his fishing gear. He succeeded in thwarting the shooting, and Sheikh's bodyguards immediately arrested the mysterious man. Harriet came as soon as she heard the noise of commotion from where Alfred and Sheikh were fishing. Sheikh thanked Alfred and promised to return his favor one day. He then left with his bodyguards. Sometime after, Alfred and Harriet returned to England. One night, Harriet saw news of a list of war victims, including her boyfriend, on television. She looked so sad. Alfred, who was at Harriet's house, accompanied her until the morning. After waking up, Alfred immediately left Harriet's house without saying goodbye because he did not want to wake her up. When Alfred arrived home, he was surprised that his wife Mary had been there. They quarreled after Mary felt disappointed in Alfred, who had chosen to resign from his job and began to fall in love with Harriet. Whereas 6 months ago, he begged Mary to go back to him. But Alfred again made her disappointed, and Mary chose to leave him. Alfred, who still wanted salmon fishing in Yemen, went with Harriet to convince Sheikh that using salmon for captive fishing was as good as the salmon that lived in the river. After successfully convincing Sheikh, they resumed the project, and the transfer of salmon from captivity would be carried out. Alfred and Harriet were relieved that their project went according to plan. On top of the dam, the two of them saw the success of the engineers from China who managed to build the dam structure, and the floodgates equipped with oxygen tanks from the British company. Not long after, some Russian airship carrying salmon from captivity came. Alfred immediately checked the condition of the salmon. He seemed happy after seeing all the salmon he had brought alive. It could be put in a fishing pond made as similar as possible to the original habitat of the salmon. At night, Alfred and Harriet swim in a fishing pond that had been finished making. Harriet revealed that she was pleased and grateful because, with the fishing project, she could forget her grief after losing her boyfriend. At that time, Alfred braved to convey his feelings to her. Harriet was happy to hear his confession, but she still needed time to open her heart again. She asked Alfred for time to think about her answer. The following day, Patricia and the British Prime Minister came to Yemen to meet Sheikh. They started working together again while attending the inauguration of the salmon fishing pond there. Many media covered the arrival of two important people from the UK. On the other hand, with Harriet at the edge of the fishing pond, Alfred told her that he had made a new fishing bait that he named Harriet, and she was happy to know that. Shortly after that, a military helicopter came. Robert, who had survived the war, seemed to get off the helicopter. He immediately found Harriet, who was very happy and grateful because she could still see her boyfriend. She immediately ran and hugged him. However, Alfred, who saw it, was very jealous of Robert's return. The inauguration of salmon fishing began. All the media started covering Sheikh, who was giving welcome to everyone present. Alfred and Harriet also attended the inauguration. They both looked very awkward after Harriet met her boyfriend. Shortly after, Sheikh then ordered to release of the salmon in the fishing pond built at the river. Sheikh, Alfred, and Harriet began to panic after they saw the salmon that had just been released swimming upriver. They were then surprised by jumping the fish into the river. They were happy because it turned out that salmon from captivity had the same ability as salmon living in the river. Alfred and Harriet seemed to hug each other after seeing that. The two of them immediately met Sheikh and celebrated their success. Even some media that came immediately covered the incident. After salmon fishing opened, some people started fishing there. At the same time, a mysterious man slipped into the dam and opened the floodgates leading to Sheikh's fishing pond. Meanwhile, Alfred, Sheikh, and a few others who were fishing, suddenly shocked by a massive wave of water coming from the direction of the dam. Alfred and Sheikh almost dragged the current, but they survived after holding onto a rock. The water in the fishing pond appeared to have receded after the dam was reclosed. However, the pond was destroyed because it was exposed to a massive water current. All the salmon that had been put in the pond were dead. Alfred and the others didn't think the hard work they'd been doing for months would fall apart. At night, Alfred and the others were still at the fishing pond and gathered around the campfire they had set up. Sheikh informed that he had found out who was behind what caused his fishing pond to be destroyed, but he did not want to arrest the perpetrator. He returned to get Alfred and Harriet to rebuild a new salmon fishing spot. Alfred approved of Sheikh's idea because he now had no other purpose after he left England. Meanwhile, Harriet refused because she chose to return to England with her boyfriend. The following day, Harriet was seen getting ready to return to England. She came to see Alfred to say goodbye. Alfred changed his mind and chose to return to England with Harriet. Alfred regretted that he could not work on rebuilding the fishery without Harriet. In addition, the salmon he moved had also died from being dragged by a large current when the dam's floodgates opened. While they were chatting, suddenly Sheikh, who was not far from there, shouted and pointed towards the fishing spot. Alfred and Harriet immediately looked towards the fishing and saw if there were still salmon survivors of the previous events. They both seemed distrustful and very happy about it because they still hoped to rebuild salmon fishing in Yemen. The film ends by showing Alfred, who finally decides to stay in Yemen. He built the project with local people so everyone there would feel involved. Harriet, who had separated from her boyfriend, volunteered to be Alfred's assistant on the project. Alfred approved it and determined to build a salmon fishing pond together. The moral that can be learned from this movie is that nothing is impossible if we do it seriously.